So you have to solve what I call the three-body problem of adoption. So one, clinical, right? You need clinical evidence to convince the physician. And then economic, right? You need have economic data to convince the payer or the budget holder in the hospital. And then workflow, you need to fit into the daily workflow of the hospital, right? So the users, you need to make the users' lives simpler, not harder, basically. And my biggest lesson from the operating side is to understand that procurement is a consensus spot. If those three incentives don't perfectly align, even a successful pilot will just stay as a pilot. It will not end in a rollout.
Hi, my name's Lester, and welcome to another episode of What's with RWE, the Canadian Healthcare Podcast. So, as everyone knows, the goal of this podcast is really to talk to experts within the entire healthcare ecosystem so that we can understand the gaps, the problems, the challenges, even the potential solutions that can solve a lot of the issues within the healthcare system. And I think we have the perfect person to talk to you about this, Jia-Yi Har. Welcome to the podcast, Jia-Yi.
Well, thanks for having me. Good to see you again,
Great.
Lester.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the reason why I brought Jia-Yi, and she'll kind of give a little bit more of her origin story a little bit later on, but just so everyone has a little bit of context, Jia-Yi has worked throughout the entire healthcare ecosystem, or at least a lot of it, from operating roles with large corporations such as Philips in terms of medical imaging, building that business up, to small startup companies, and then also in the investing space as well, both in private equity that she'll talk and venture investing, which is two different things. So I'm not expert there. GAE will educate us on sort of the differences. But again, welcome to the podcast, GAE. Maybe let's just start from there and jump right in. Maybe just give the audience a little bit of your origin story. How did you come to having this such an expansive career in the healthcare ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you. Um, yes, happy to share my journey so far. My path has been pretty much non-linear. I started at MIT doing research in microbial genetics and molecular biology, so real bench science, precision, patients, and the scientific method, and I really loved it. But pretty quickly, I realized that discovery on its own doesn't change anything. You can publish papers, make breakthroughs, but if it just stays in the lab, it doesn't matter. What fascinated me was the translation piece. How does this become a therapy, a product, or even a business? So I made what seemed like a crazy pivot. I joined Partners Group doing private equity, focused on leverage buyouts in healthcare. And this was a complete mental shift. Suddenly, I was looking at mature businesses, healthcare services, dental networks, care homes, medtech suppliers, contract manufacturing, and I was thinking in completely different terms. So it wasn't about the science anymore. It's about value creation. What drives revenue growth over the next 3 to 5 years? What are the regulatory landscape? Where is it heading? What are the tailwinds and headwinds? How do you optimize the cost structure to improve profitability? And how do you generate free cash flow? And what are the bolt-on acquisitions that make sense? And then very financially, what's the entry valuation and what are the exit scenarios? So it was this intense crash course in the economics of healthcare, and I was learning to dissect businesses not by their technologies, and but by what actually moves the P&L. And because we were looking across so many subsectors, I got this panoramic view of how the health system fits together and how these little different pieces connect. But here's the thing, it was very high level, very strategic, very financial, uh, but I didn't really understand how things work on the ground. How do hospitals make decisions? How do technology actually get adopted? So I really wanted to get closer to that reality. Therefore, I moved to the operating side. Again, it seemed like a crazy idea at the point. A lot of people asked me, why did you leave partners? So I joined Philips Healthcare and led the imaging software business across Asia Pacific. And this is where I really learned how hard adoption is. We were integrating advanced informatics into imaging clinical workflows, and that was before digital health was even a thing. And what I discovered is that even if your technology genuinely improves outcome, if it doesn't fit into hospital workflows or reimbursement frameworks, it just doesn't scale. And somehow that experience pulled me towards startups. I helped build the consumer arm of Asia Genomics, which was one of Southeast Asia's early precision medicine platform. We were doing genomics-based diagnostics and prevention, trying to bring it directly to the consumers and wellness businesses at that point. As a startup, scrappy is totally different from Philips. So we had to raise money, hire teams, explain GWAS, genetic risk scores to doctors and consumers who had never heard of any of these. And that really gave me massive respect for founders, the ambiguity that they live in every day, and how different it is to create something from scratch versus optimizing something that's already exists. Um, After that, I also co-founded a home care business around the time that ended up getting acquired by a listed healthcare group in Singapore. Eventually, I wanted to bring all these perspectives together: the scientific, the operational, the financial. So I moved to venture and helped launch Cathay Health that invested at the intersection of medtech, life sciences, and digital health, basically where technology met biology. And having been a founder myself, I think that really changed how I work with companies. I understand what early stage teams are actually dealing with, the difference between 0 to 1 and 1 to scale, and how to turn promising science into a real business, how to bring in the right partners and the right investors into the journey at the right time. It's a completely different rhythm from PE. It's less about optimizing what exists and more about helping something new take shape and navigating all the different uncertainties that came with that. So when I look back, I mean, it seems like a very non-linear journey, but each chapter built a different muscle. Science taught me how to think rigorously and ask better questions. PE taught me discipline and capital efficiency. Corporate life was very different, taught me how systems actually work and why they're so hard to change. And startups taught me resilience and speed, and honestly, humility. And venture brought it all together. The pattern recognition, risk assessment, and also really empathy for what it actually takes to build something in healthcare.
That's amazing. That's a fantastic journey, and I'm definitely I need to pick your brain right now to just understand the different pieces. Because maybe let's start at one piece, and this may be unfair, not to you necessarily, but to the PE, the private equity world. Maybe you can explain that a bit more, especially contrasting that with venture, because I think private equity gets a little bit of a bad rap in people's minds because people probably think back to like 80s movies, right? Right? People, these firms that come in, buy out and then strip it to the bones, and then there's this connotation with PE that's maybe just unfair, right? So maybe if you can speak about what is PE versus what is venture, and then like why is it important to have instruments or have institutions like PE around?
Yeah, so you really need to think about the whole whole company life cycle. Venture capital, as you can derive from the meaning, where venture it's really high risk, high return, and the funds that focuses on this they really have a risk profile and appetite that's very different from PE investors. Right, so the metrics are different. Typically, it's more focused on the science, on the technology, differentiated IPs at the very early end, the seed to Series A funds. And then as you move through the growth stage, Series B, Series C, you start to look at the commercialization path, right? And also path to profitability, right? Especially today, it's not growth at all cost anymore. And that has its value in the company building journey. And then on the other hand, for the private equity side, we're really looking at profitable companies. So you can imagine like a family-owned business that has achieved a certain level of revenue, and they're profitable, but they're just not growing. They need additional capital and probably more governance to come in to help them, one, professionalize the management of the company, and two, get it ready to do inorganic growth. For example, bolting on businesses that make sense to create a larger group that can have more impact. So the two strategies are quite different, and typically the philosophy of investments is also quite different. And having been on both sides, it really makes me appreciate how different the styles are between the two sides, because I've worked with very early stage seed to Series A investors, and all the way to Partners Group is 400 million. For a deal, for example, it is very different scale.
Wow, wow. Thank you for explaining that. I know it's very straightforward for you, but just in case, there's billions of people watching this and it's a very general audience, hopefully this helps people understand the importance of these different types of institutions in the entire healthcare ecosystem. Because one thing you said that was, I think, very, very critical is just because you have a good technology, even if it saves people's lives and it does very, very good work, it still may not work because it just doesn't fit into existing methods or existing workflows. So maybe you can speak a little bit about that, like being in the healthcare ecosystem for so long. What are some key learnings that you've taken from your different roles?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Um, so when I think about healthcare, I really take uh, I really map it across the whole value chain. So upstream, you can imagine in your mind, you have the engines of innovations, drugs, medical devices, life science tools that are focused on R&D productivity. And then downstream is where the rubber meets the road. Diagnosis, patient care, disease management. And then you have the peripheral layer, right? Administrative tech, claims automation, revenue cycle management, and so on, which is non-clinical but still dramatically improves efficiency. It's in the downstream patient-facing layer where innovation meets the complex reality of hospitals and clinics that you learn the hardest lessons. And after my time as an operator at Philips and later as an investor, there are three things that stand out. One, healthcare is a marathon, not a sprint. The life cycle from initial concept to a commercial exit is long and non-linear. each milestone is a serious test. So proof of concept, you have clinical evidence, validation, FDA approval, reimbursement approval, and then commercialization, right? And the best founders, whether they're working on a new device or AI diagnostic, start from the problem, not from the technology. They have to ask, is this a nice to have or a must have, right? It saves lives, saves money, and fundamentally changes productivity. Because if it's not a must have, the journey will likely end at some point, right? Maybe as a pilot, and then run out of money, and it will never scale. Secondly, adoption is king, and incentives drive adoption. This is the biggest killer of brilliant ideas because healthcare is inherently risk averse. And a hospital doesn't adopt technology just because it's elegant. They adopt it because it improves patient access, throughput, reduces error, improves patient outcome, and most critically, um, there needs to be a business case to it. So you have to solve what I call the three body problem of adoption. So one, clinical, right? You need clinical evidence to convince the physician, and then economic, right? You need have economic data to convince the payer or the budget holder in the hospital, and then workflow. You need to fit into the daily workflow of the hospital, right? So the users, you need to make the users' lives simpler, not harder, basically. And my biggest lesson from the operating side is to understand that procurement is a consensus spot. If those three incentives don't perfectly align, even a successful pilot will just stay as a pilot. It will not end in a rollout. Okay. And the third point is that operational discipline is the ultimate differentiator, especially today, in today's market. Great science, great strategy is just the price of entry. What separates a good company from a category defining one is operational maturity and execution. And this is comprehensive. It includes one, focus on regulatory readiness, robust quality systems, and consistent delivery to build trust with your customers. And increasingly, is also a fierce commitment to capital efficiency because it's a long cycle industry. If you burn through unnecessary cash on non-essential activities, this can kill a company before it even clears the regulatory hurdle. And so execution is what turns a promising idea into an enduring, reliable business that clinicians and hospitals trust and in investors' views are fundable. So that was three.
Great.
Fourth thing that I've learned is that market timing is everything. So this is where foresight comes in. Ideas can be too early or too late, and the difference is often driven by external factors that the founder can't control. And so, for example, there's legislative changes or crucial reimbursement shifts, right? Like a new CPT code being approved, or technological maturity, reliability of a sensor, or accessibility of cloud computing, or artificial intelligence, right? So finally converges to create a scalable market. And having that operational discipline to be ready to scale instantly when the market timing window opens is key. Yeah. So in summary, if you want to succeed in healthcare, you need to combine deep scientific conviction with operational realism and excellent timing and discipline.
No, that's thank you for going through these key pillars that people need to really think about. Now, if I was a, and I am not, but if I was a at a great startup company and was coming to you, a GIE, to just get either seek funding or get guidance, right? Because you mentioned that a company has to have at least at the very basic level in a certain perspective, like great strategy and vision, but it's really operational discipline that puts you over the top so that people will invest in you. Can you maybe go through a little bit in more detail, like what is great strategy, what does great vision look like, and then what does great operational discipline, like what how would a person, like a startup founder, entrepreneur, articulate those three core things that makes investor go, bingo, that's a killer, that's a I want that.
Yeah, I think this is really important to understand, right? As I mentioned, start with a pain point, not with the technology. Especially in life sciences, it's a very scientific, very technical field. A lot of founders tend to be quite partial to their technology, right? It could be a PhD project, right, that was developed in the lab and then they got it patented. There's also some applications that could be that could leverage that piece of technology. But um, I think in this market, especially, you have to be ruthlessly clear about what problem you're solving and where it sits in the healthcare system along which part of the value chain, right? Are you addressing an R&D bottleneck? Are you addressing a clinical workflow problem? And it's because investors also think in systems these days. And the best pitches I see now make it immediately obvious how the solution will make a specific part of the system faster, cheaper, better, and why that matters enough for someone to actually pay for it. So one, lead with the pain. And also, in terms of strategy, look at the competitive landscape of what you're trying to build, right? As I mentioned, it can be too early, it can be too late. When it's too crowded, it's too late. It's a red ocean. And also, which what is the business model? You need to articulate who is going to pay for it because the market isn't short on clever ideas or interesting science. It's short on viable businesses. And that means you need to explain um, yeah, who is the payer? Is it the hospital? Is it the insurers? Is it out of pocket? And what's the actual procurement cycle? Because saying the health systems will buy this is very different from understanding that it's going to take 18 months, right, to come to a conclusion with the purchasing committee, and that will require clinical evidence, budget approval, IT integration, and so on. So the investors want to know that your model can fit into the incentives of those three parties, right? And that your model can sustain itself after the grant money runs out, for example, or early enthusiasm fades. So I've seen so many companies with great technology, no path to revenue, or being stuck in pilot cycles.
Great, great, great. So that's a little advice for everyone, right? GIE just kind of gave you the blueprint to how to get money from venture for your specific startup. So hopefully, everyone took that, and made sure they kept that in their brain. But you mentioned this a couple of times already, GIE, which is the idea that things have been shifting, at least from the market perspective.
Yeah.
So how do you, maybe if you think you decide the time frame, maybe 5 years ago, which is I guess 2020, and then
Yeah.
to date to
That's
now,
when the hype
like what
happened.
has changed? Oh yeah, actually, maybe just before that, then, right? But let's say roughly around that time frame to now, what has changed besides, of course, the pandemic? But what has changed in people's mindset from an investment perspective?
Well, very obviously, one is cost of capital is much higher today compared to pre-pandemic, right? When we were in low interest environments. Uh, During that time, startups, funds, I guess investors in general were a lot more uh, has higher risk appetite, had higher risk appetites. But today, that's gone, right? Based on because of our macro environment, the generalist investors have largely exited the healthcare market. Right, you can see that in biotech, medtech, across the whole spectrum, including digital companies in healthcare. So the bar of making new investments are much higher now, and capital, um, you can't count on having a next round basically without proving, without getting to your milestones. You need to show at each round, you need to show that you will be able to have a capital efficient path to validation. So capital is still available. There's still a lot of dry powder, but it's only going to companies that can deploy it intelligently. And you don't need to be profitable on day one, but you absolutely need to articulate the specific milestone and the pathway towards profitability. It's a bit different on the biotech side, right? So for a drug company, it's quite different from a company that's building, healthcare tools that's being used in a hospital. For the drug side, there are different milestones hitting IND and enabling stage or getting into the clinic, and then it's really cycles of de-risking, fundraising, de-risking. And but for healthcare, um, patient-facing, physician-facing tools, um, these type of milestones could be an FDA approval, right? FDA 510K clearance, early clinical data, and then for digital health companies, it could be a commercial milestone, right? For example, signing a payer pilot or integration with a major health system. But you absolutely need to show that, okay, raising 10, $20 million will bring us to point A. At which point our valuation, which there should be a value inflection point at which we could, raise at a higher valuation. So that needs to be rigorously tested, and investors are a lot stricter or a lot more stringent in deploying capital to groups that are able to demonstrate that.
Got it. Got it. What surprises me a little bit, just I'm not in the venture space, just trying to understand this a little bit. I just assume what you talk about right now is just standard, right? Like what was in 2020 or 2019 during the height, you say when capital was just readily available, what did people do? Like, did people just randomly someone come to you off the street, you're like, oh sure, I'll fund that, I'll fund this? Like, was it really that just people were that promiscuous with their capital? Is that a good way to phrase it? Or was it realistically people didn't even have to achieve milestones in order to get next round of funding?
Well, in general, I guess the market was a lot more optimistic, right? And then there are cheap capital around, so you have to deploy it. And unfortunately, that also leads to less discipline among investors. And those companies have raised at elevated valuations during those years. And now reality hits, right? So they did not achieve what they should with that valuation. And unfortunately, there are lots of down rounds, significant haircuts that investors are facing. And therefore, that is also making investors more selective, which they should in the first place, right? And also, they are basically um, also using uh, allocating more capital to support their own portfolio rather than doing new deals. I think that's one of the key points as well. Yes, there is capital, but they need to reserve more to invest and support their companies through insider rounds, because there's always delays in hitting milestones, right? So companies that has raised a Series B, they're supposed to hit a certain commercial milestone, but that has, you know, not come to pass, and they need more time to execute before going out to raise in the wider market. So what do they do, right? If the company is needs the funding, the insiders have to fund the round to support, right? If not, they need to write off their investments, which is not what they want. So I'm seeing a lot of such activities, right? Undisclosed insider rounds without going on in the market as well.
Got it. Got it. Got it. No, thank you. Uh, Now you talked a lot about different macro environment, the macro picture. Meaning, like, for those of you who aren't familiar, macro, I assume you were assuming to like macroeconomics, like how the world economics is basically kind of moving in tandem with each other. And based on this change from, let's say, 2020 or 2019 to today, 2025, how does that change sort of the healthcare investing, not necessarily dynamic, but almost like the trends? Do you now invest in different things because
Mhm.
of the additional higher bar that needs to be set, whereas in the past you would have invested in something, something else because the bar was different? So maybe you can speak a little bit about the healthcare investing trends that you see right now in your world.
Yeah, so there are two things that drives the trend, right? One is availability of technology. That's one end. On the other hand, is the availability of capital. Um, let's talk about the technology first, right? So right now, I think the most powerful trend is really convergence. The traditional boundaries between biotech, medtech, digital health are fundamentally blurring, and you can see these everywhere. Hospitals are not just care centers, they're becoming real world data platforms, right? And then medtech and pharma companies are engaging consumers directly, and big tech is embedding artificial intelligence into everything from drug discovery to surgical robotics and so on. So here, the new frontier is not really innovation per se, but it's integration. And the companies that can connect across silo, from data to drug, device to delivery, linking patients directly to the payer, um, will be the ones that will attract investment. So if we double click on that, let's start at the scientific end of the spectrum, because what's happening upstream is really exciting today and it's driving a lot of the investments. So we are really at this incredible moment where biology and computation are coming together in a profound way. And it started with our ability to actually measure biology at a level that we've never seen before. For example, next generation sequencing, which you are very familiar with, single cell RNA sequencing, proteomics, right? And then pairing that with the computational power that we have today had completely changed how we understand and model living systems. We are generating and interpreting biological data in ways that would seem like science fiction just a few years ago. And that's really interesting, is how this is really shaping the pharma industry today, right? There's this whole generation of companies emerging tech bio platforms that are using all these tools to design genuinely better therapeutics, like, for example, engineered T cell engagers, antibody drug conjugates, siRNAs, targeted protein degradation. So exciting. And they're being very smart about it by applying these advanced modalities to disease pathways that we already understand pretty well, and especially in high demand areas like oncology, information, and immunology. And they're actually improving their odds of clinical trials while moving faster from discovery to IND filing to early clinical data. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is that the development strategies are also getting smarter. Companies are using places like Australia, China to move quickly through those early clinical phase 1B, 2A trials, where they can seamlessly go from safety signals to efficacy signals. And you're seeing way more partnerships, new co-licensing models. And the pharma side is also going into the table earlier than they used to, partly because they are looking at these massive patent cliffs and need to refill their pipelines. So the bottom line is science, data, and collaboration are converging in a way that's making drug development more predictable and more efficient. And that's driving a lot of the investments on the biotech side. But moving beyond the lab and the drug pipeline, we are also seeing innovations in clinical trials. For decades, they have been slow, expensive, and really inefficient. But now we are seeing technologies that can capture real world data, continuously stratify patients, responders with precision, and also using that to personalize care pathways based on how someone is predicted to respond to a certain drug. And so we are moving these rigid one size fits all protocols into something that's more adaptive and intelligent. So this is on the drug discovery side, or drug development side. And on the other end, if you look at healthcare delivery, this is where the conversation has really shifted in the last few years, right? You mentioned about between 2019 to today, it's unrecognizable. So digital health have went through this massive hype cycle. During the time frame that we were talking about, there were tons of capital, huge valuation, promises of transformation, and then now we are in a very different phase, right? It's about proof. Does it actually work? Does it improve outcome? Do people pay for it? And the market's gotten a lot more disciplined, as you mentioned. But what's interesting is that's new, relatively recent, is that artificial intelligence is now genuinely applied across everywhere in this space. And it shows up in very different forms depending on the use case and the risk profiles. At the simplest level, you've got productivity tools that just make that administrative side of care less painful, like scheduling, billing, follow-ups, prior authorization. It's not the most interesting thing, but these tools are getting adopted very quickly because the return on investment is obvious and the risk is relatively low. And they just make the system run better. And yeah, then you have the middle layer that's really taking off now. AI scribes, clinical documentation tools, right? So it's huge because it's addressing something that's really real, clinician burnout, right? Doctors are spending hours every day on documentation, clicking through EHRs, and these tools are really giving their time back to focus on patients again. But still, there's a certain risk of hallucination, for example. Therefore, doctors are still in the loop. So it's a little, the risk is a little higher than the plain, productivity tools. And then at the higher end, I think this is where it's really, really interesting You've got regulated clinical AI that are maturing, that are directly involved in patient care. We are talking about imaging pathology systems that are FDA cleared and actually making diagnostic decisions or helping make diagnostic decisions because, again, there's still a human in the loop. And I believe there are over hundreds, couple hundreds of these FDA cleared software as medical device right now, which is wild. If you consider there were basically very little 10 years ago. They're detecting cancers, informing surgical margins, for example, and planning radiation treatments. And then you are seeing on the other end surgical AI emerging as a really competitive and compelling category. So these are computer vision systems that integrate directly with robotic surgical platforms, analyzing video feeds in real time, you know, um, identifying anatomical structures and flagging complications. So, and data has shown that these are reducing operative time and also complications by like 20-30%. So I think even though the adoption across these type of higher risk clinical surgical AI are slower because you're dealing with reimbursement questions, right, data privacy, hospital governance, liability concerns, but the long-term potential are extraordinary. You can really bring about the promise of earlier detection, safer procedures, better outcomes, and genuinely lower cost of care. And I believe we will see this accelerate over the years, and this is where I see the most impact of artificial intelligence in patient care.
Perfect. I do have maybe a little bit of a fun question for you here. I was just thinking about it while you're talking about, the different advances in especially AI that's very much interestingly being adopted inside the healthcare ecosystem. Like what do you think in terms of an over under for an AI general practitioner? Like the doctor that you see on Star Trek, right? Do you think in the next 30 years we'll have a AI general practitioner?
Firstly, I did not watch Star Trek, so I don't really understand what to say about uh, that. But if you're talking about a fully AI GP, so I think of AI uh, in terms of a ladder, right? So you go on low risk, high risk. So first you have automation, boring stuff, augmentation, which I think is the imaging and pathology and so on, where the AI helps in the decision making, but the human is still making the final decision. And then autonomy, right now we have a few examples, right? For example, closed loop systems, the artificial pancreas that can detect levels of blood glucose and adjust the dosage of insulin automatically. That's pretty autonomous, but within a very set uh, range. But you're talking about a fully automated systems that is making decisions about human health. Think of it as autonomous driving. I don't think we are there. I don't think we will be there for the next 20 years, to be frank, because there's always this higher bar to be cleared when an AI is doing something versus a human is doing something, right? Human drivers can make an accident, and it seems like the AI has a higher bar to cross in order to do that. And I think in the medical and the healthcare, that's really life and death. Um, yeah, I think we won't have that automated GP scenario for a very long time unless there are very specific use cases, right? For example, like really remote area with zero doctor accessibility. There's nothing, right? That is better than nothing.
Um, yeah, so maybe we'll come back. I'll have you come back hopefully sooner than this, right? But in 30 years, for sure, you'll come back and we'll play this clip again and see if AI doctors or general practitioners are available yet.
I
But
probably live in the UK, right? I mean, as I've said, there are some areas that could use an AI doctor because there's no doctor, right? The alternative is not getting any care versus automated care. So yeah, there will be a gradient or very specific use cases of that, I believe.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, one thing, just this conversation has been fascinating, and not just fascinating because of the subject itself, but because of the way you articulate how you think about this world, the healthcare ecosystem. You have a very you look at things from a very systems approach, right? Like, how did you develop that, GIE? Was it natural? I think. Sorry, I don't actually know this for a fact, but I think you're from Singapore. Is it like the Singapore? Is it a Singaporean thing, or is it yourself? Is it a family? Like how you were raised? Like how did you have this type of systems thinking approach plus very first principles approach to building up that system as well?
I think that starts from the scientific training that I had in the beginning, right? I like to look at how things fit together in a system rather than in silos, and also what one part uh, how one part would impact the other, and also the second reason is to your point, I've worked across different parts of the healthcare system. I've seen it up close, how it works on the ground, as well as on a more systemic level. I've worked with private and public groups in Asia Pacific when I was trying to scale advanced technologies into the hospital, so I understand how I think. I've also worked with payers and insurers, for example, to and understand right how they approach population level risk profiles, for example. So yeah, I guess it's a combination of those experiences that has given me this view, and of course, uh, going from an investor versus operator lens, right? That is really eye-opening as well. If I've stayed an investor, at partners, never gone to Philips or never built startups, I think my view would be quite incomplete.
Very, very, fantastic. It does kind of speak to this idea that, it's great. I understand, my parents are in some ways this way where they have worked in the same company, same field for like 30, 40 years, but it speaks to being mobile and gaining experiences in different parts of the ecosystem to really kind of expand your mind, just your perspective on how something works. So it's great that you actually have all this experience now. I know we're right up against the time. I don't want to take up too much of your time because this is actually later in your day already. You're based over in the UK, so I want to be, of course, respectful of your time. Maybe to finish things off, is just maybe give some pointers to first time founders, right? How how should they, you know, really right now capital is really really tough to obtain, and it's in a world that is obviously quite changing. I mean, there's like as we all know, political situations are changing across the world right now. So there's probably an opportunity there, but because of the fact that there's these massive changes, massive shifts, it's also a almost like perceived as a risk. So what would be maybe your top advice for founders in the healthcare ecosystem? What should they be? What's the first thing they should be really doing?
Yeah, I think we touched upon that upon fundraising. One, really start with the pain point, right, of technology. I think we covered that, and also prove that you you have a viable business model. right? If you don't know how to do that in the beginning, speak to your potential buyers, right? Potential customers to understand that there's a real pain point and there's a willingness to pay, there's a product market fit, and show them how you can achieve, right, a certain milestones without burning too much through too much capital, and really find investors who understand your type of business, right? And this is something founders often miss. Not all investors are the same. We touch upon the different life cycle of companies, right? So we are really at the very seed, very early stage. You look at seed funds, accelerators, incubators, angel investors that are willing to take more risk. And then when if you're further along, you like to get investors that have experience in the field that you are building in. And just that a venture fund that backs biotech would think very differently from a tech fund, right? That invest in digital across multiple industries, even though it, they say that they invest in healthcare, but the lens will be quite different, right? They will ask you, what's your CAC, what's your LTV, when you are selling into hospitals, where the sales cycle is long, it may not be the right fit for you. And if you're talking to strategics like a big pharma or a medtech um, company, they care about ecosystem fit and how you would fit into the portfolio of products and services. So the right investor should feel like a strategic partner that can help you think through some of these important strategic matters, and not just a source of capital. And then building relationship way before you need the money. This is very important because fundraising is very relational, relationship driven, and it's getting even more in today's environment. Investors are being more selective, as we mentioned, and doing much deeper diligence. So you want to keep them warm. You want to update them quarterly about your progress, even though you're not actively fundraising right now. Because when the capital markets are tight, investors backed founders that they know, right? Businesses that they understand, and teams that they believe can execute through volatility. And I think you also touch upon systems level thinking, and this is important for investors and at the same time also founders, right? Demonstrate that you understand what you're where you are creating value along the value chain, right? And that kind of fluency signals maturity, and that you know your market well, and you're not just a scientist or an engineer that's building something cool. You actually understands the ecosystem that you're operating in and how to navigate it. And lastly, I think in today's market, it may sound quite surprising, right? Especially for an early stage founder, you should start with the exit in mind, in a sense like who will buy my business in the end, right? Who's the natural acquirer? Do you fit into the portfolio of certain strategics? Are you going to sell it to build to a certain scale and sell it to a PE platform, or are you building towards an IPO? And you know how my IPO markets are today. So having a point of view and how value gets realized, even if it changes. Show investors that you're thinking about the full life cycle of the business and not just the next round. So bottom line, raising today is not just about hype or flashy headlines. It's really clarity, credibility, and strategic alignment.
Great, great, great. No, I appreciate that very, very much, Jia-Yi. And I very much enjoyed how you highlighted that finding the right investor is incredibly important, not just because you need someone with money. It's very much about someone who is going to go to distance with you, because you said already talked about early on that this is a marathon. This is a very, very long marathon that
Mhm.
I think maybe a lot of tech founders that go into health tech may not fully appreciate or understand, right? So you need that investor that is there with you, because they understand that, okay, this is going to be a slog, and we're going to help you along the entire way. Is that kind of like the accurate way of thinking about finding the right investor, or why the right investor is important?
Yeah, they should be with you up and down, throughout the ups and downs, right? And also, hopefully, they can open doors for you, right, to the
Mhm.
right potential customers, partners. For example, UK companies trying to scale in the US. Hopefully, they can also help you with that, right? And also, ultimately, um, between each round, help to find the right investors into the next round. I think that's a huge value add, especially in today's market, and help you think about your exit strategy. So if they have existing um, strategic relationship, perfect, right? I mean that helps open the door in potential partnership, and also drive some of the exit uh, conversations, because you want to, again, you need to start the conversation quite early, right? Get strategics interested in your product, know that you exist, right? Yeah, I think all these signal credibility as well. Sometimes I was just speaking on a panel the other day, and I say one of the hallmarks of credibility today in today's market is uh, having a strategic on the cap table, especially in high risk areas, like medtech, right, biotech as well. So yeah.
Great, great. Thank you very much there, Gia. Yeah, again, I don't want to take up more of your time, because I know you're incredibly busy, and I appreciate this conversation. But of course, that means that, if, for those of you who are founders looking to raise capital, you can just tell from Jia-Yi that she is a fantastic healthcare investor. So if you have any deals, great companies that you're interested in pitching, I'm sure you can reach out to Gia. You may where can people find you, Gia? I'm just looking online. Is LinkedIn, or is X, or formerly known as Twitter, the best way to reach you at, or is there
LinkedIn will
another
be
way?
the most. I'm more active on LinkedIn because
Okay,
I
LinkedIn. So we'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes below, so that people can reach out to you and make their pitch. Remember, everyone, if you have a pitch, you got to make sure that you have that operational discipline that you can articulate to GAE. So thank you very much again, GAE, for joining us on What's with RW, the Canadian Healthcare Podcast. Thank you, everyone else out there that's been watching this podcast. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to put them in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and have a wonderful rest of your day. So thanks a lot, GAE again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Great. Thank you.